On this edition of Read with Ronald, I read Ernest J In My Father's House. So before we get into this book, I do want to give y'all a trigger warning. There are some heavy themes in this book, such as abuse against women and murder. And I want to give y'all a spoiler warning to let y'all know that I'm going all through this plot, and if you don't want to be spoiled, then thank you for watching up to this point, but feel free to turn off the video here. And if you decide that after you read the book you want to come back and see if you agree with what I have to say on it, then feel free. First published in 1978, Ernest J. Gaines' In My Father's House follows Reverend Philip Martin of St. Adrian, Louisiana, as he tries to rectify his past mistakes after the appearance of the mysterious Robert X in town. In My Father's House was Gaines' fourth novel, and he sought to present a drama and tragedy of the separation between fathers and sons caused by American slavery. Early drafts of the story featured a slightly different plotline under the working title Revenge. Gaines used the omniscient narration perspective for this story, which was challenging for him to write as he was used to using first-person narration perspective. Reviews of the story were mixed, with critics describing the novel as a shallow departure from his previous critically acclaimed novels with characters who were too impersonal for audiences to connect with. So I got this book because back in December, y'all know I did the book swap with Tati, where we read Men Cry in the Dark, because that was my pick to try and showcase a book about black men written by a black man. In My Father's House was the other book that I was considering for that book swap. I bought that along with A Gathering of Old Men, and y'all know I read A Gathering of Old Men in February and I loved it. I was trying to use In My Father's House for a book swap, but it's like other books kept coming up that I wanted to use for book swap instead. Me and Tati, we are in this book club, so we do the book swap and then we're in a separate book club with other book club people. It was my turn to choose a book for book club, so I was like, you know what, this is the perfect opportunity to read this book. So I decided to use In My Father's House for the book club, and that is why we are here today, because I'm going to talk about my experience reading that book. The book club did meet to discuss the book, and so I'm going to put the link in the description box for y'all to go check out that meeting to hear some of the discussion on the book. That's how I got the book. That's what made me choose this book to read. Today is June 6th. I'm starting In My Father's House by Ernest J. Gaines. I am hopeful that this will be good. This is the book I picked for book club, and I've been wanting to read this book for a long time, and I know that some of the members of book club, they finished it. They said it was an average read to them, but I'm hopeful that I'll like it and that it'll at least be good to me, because you know we all have different reading preferences. Because I really like The Gathering of Old Men. That was a 5-star read to me. I'm hopeful I'll at least like it. It's June 8th. I've been reading In My Father's House. I'm only on chapter 3. So the story follows this guy named Robert X. He rolls into this town. Nobody knows who he is. Nobody knows where he's come from. He says he's coming from Chicago, but nobody believes that story. Everybody's creeped out by him, and everybody keeps noticing how he's like always around the Reverend's house, always watching the Reverend's house. You know, the Reverend is like the most respected guy in the town. You know, he's fighting very hard for civil rights for the black folks down there, and everybody loves him, everybody respects him, everybody expects he'll go into politics in Washington. I'm getting the vibe that Robert is probably the Reverend's secret love child or something like that, because he just seems super interested in the Reverend. Nobody knows him. He has no reason to be super interested in the Reverend unless he has something to do with the Reverend's past or something like that. That's my assumption. I feel like he's the Reverend's secret love child. I don't know what he's coming to. I don't know if he's coming to get to know the Reverend, if he's coming to tear down the Reverend's perfect life. It's June 13th. I'm still reading In My Father's House. And so what's gone on in the plot so far is that, you know, Robert, he went to the party with Shepard, and, you know, Philip recognizes him from somewhere. I'm excited to see how this is gonna play out between Philip and Robert, because Philip, he fell out when he saw Robert. Like, he fell out from shock. So I'm like, oh Lord, dramatics. Also, I'm excited to see like what happens with Shepard, because everybody keeps saying Shepard is very mean and, you know, he's very jealous over his girlfriend Beverly. I'm excited to see how this gonna go with him. I'm excited to see how this goes with him and what his part of the plot is, because Shepard is interesting to me. And I'm also excited to see how this little civil rights thing that they are working on goes, because basically they trying to get equal pay at this store that they had to fight hard for just to get black people to work there. So now they're trying to get equal pay for black workers with white workers. So I'm excited to see how this is gonna go, because obviously this is what this is building up to. So the other The other members of the book club, they said this book was okay. They finished it. They said it kind of was like a little abrupt ending and stuff like that, which, is not going to surprise me because the ending to The Gathering of Old Men was a little bit abrupt too. But I'm excited to see if I'm still going to enjoy it at the very least, because I've enjoyed one of Ernest's stories before. I plan to read some more by him, so I'm hopeful that I'll enjoy this, even if it is seem a little abrupt ending, but we'll see how it goes. So it's about 2:30 in the morning on June 14th. I am still reading in my father's house. So one of the complaints that the book club had was that the book seems to take like a really long time to get to the plot. Like, I remember last time we talked, they were on like chapter 8. It seemed like they were still waiting on the plot to start. And I can kind of see it. I'm on chapter 7, and it do feel like the plot is like just now getting started. Like, it seemed like so far it's just been set up to this big moment, and we just now getting to like the beginning of the plot. So I can see it. But what I will say is where I'm at in the book, it's very interesting. Because once again, just like with The Gathering of Old Men, I'm once again sitting here like, would I make the same decision that Philip made? If it was me, and Robert was my son, and he was in jail, the options was bail him out and start forming a relationship with him, or leave him in there so that the black people can get equal pay and get better civil rights. What would I choose? It's just like with The Gathering of Old Men. It's like, what would I choose? I think that's what I really love about his books. I can read the main characters and I can relate to them. I can put myself in them situations and be like, what would I do in this situation? I can relate to what they got going on. I can relate to what they're saying. Because Philip is older. And, a big thing in the book is how he fell out because he saw Robert. Like, now he's all embarrassed because he done fell out, and he feels like less of a man because he couldn't pick himself back up in time. And he just feels embarrassed for like being on the ground all along and being all feeble and weak. And I can relate to that because I'd be embarrassed if I fell out and I wasn't able to get up off the floor on my own. And everybody in the community looks up to me and respects me, and now all of a sudden I'm laying here on the ground in front of everybody embarrassed. I can relate to that. That's why I love this man's books, because I can relate to his characters. I can see myself in those characters. Whether I've reached their ages or not, I can see myself in the characters. And so with that being said, I'm going to try to finish the book tonight. It's only 11 chapters. I'm on chapter 7, so I got about 5 more chapters left. So I'm going to try and finish as much as I can tonight, but I'm definitely going to try to have this whole book done by today. So it's still June 14th. It's just later on today. And yeah, so Philip, he did what he did in the book, and now he's paying the consequences. This book, once again, has me like, what would I do if I was in this situation? I can't choose a side. Yes, I can. I feel like I'd probably be on the side of the men, because they make the point to say that like everybody except Jonathan understands where he's coming from, but the cause is more important. I understand what they're saying from the perspective of a black person and as a Christian person. In both cases, the cause always does come first. I probably would have made the decision the men made, and I'd probably be on their side regarding the cause. But Jonathan is stupid. He's 22, so he's young, and he think he know everything. And he gonna find out real quick that he don't know everything. When I was reading Their Eyes Are Watching God, I was reading the foreword. One of the things the foreword said was, we don't throw away our legends. And it was referring to the black community and how Zora Neale Hurston was kind of like outcasted and kind of forgotten about until her work was rediscovered. And I'm just like, that is true. You don't throw away your legends. You don't throw away the wisdom and the knowledge that those who came before you bestow upon you. And that's what Jonathan is doing. He thinks he knows everything because he's been out there marching since the movement started. But what Philip was trying to tell him was, boy, there was a whole world before you got here. And you don't understand what led up to this because you didn't live through it. That's why I'm like, I would side with the men on their decision, but I understand where Philip is coming from, and I still support him. But I say all that to say that Jonathan, he truly does not know what he's up against. You would think he would understand, considering where he lives and the experiences that he's had. He think he know everything. I feel like what's gonna happen is he gonna find out real quick he's not as equipped to run the movement as he thinks he is, and I am here for it. Jonathan is one of them people who, like, we should only look out for our own. We shouldn't be trying to, like, get other people to help us with the cause. And I'm like, that's not how that works. Yes, black people create, but they don't own nothing in this community. He gonna realize real quick that what Philip was saying to him was right, and that he was not prepared. He thinks he is, but he's really not. He preached the whole sermon. He can't even connect with the people in his sermon, but he think he can lead the movement. But the movement comprises of the same people he just preached to, and he couldn't even connect with them sermon-wise, but he think he gonna be able to lead them civil rights-wise. If y'all was gonna vote Philip out, the person who should have been in charge was Mills, not Jonathan. Why would y'all put Jonathan in charge? He don't know nothing. And this is what happens when you throw away the wisdom and the knowledge that your elders have passed on to you, and you think you know everything. You think you know better than they do, even though they've been around longer. They done seen it all. I got about 3 chapters left in this book. I want to see how this goes. I can't really give it a rating right now, but I am enjoying it. It's about 11 o'clock at night. I just finished In My Father's House. It was an experience. I don't know how I feel about that ending. I'm satisfied, but I'm not. The story was focused on Philip and his son, and so the ending finishes with Philip, but I'm not satisfied because, you know, it's still like, I still would have liked to see some of the things that the plot set up, but the way it ended, it's okay. Like, yes, we don't see them fighting for civil rights, but at the same time, they can't really go up there and pick it this time, but Jonathan's gonna lead them into the next era of civil rights movement because Philip is fired. You know, Shepard and Beverly, it's assumed they're gonna get married. I like that Shepard kind of got called out for being like the kind of guy that like really didn't like getting involved in nothing. For a moment, I did think the story was going one way, but I'm glad it didn't go that way because I was like, that would have been too much. I enjoyed it for the most part. Was it as good as A Gathering of Old Men? I don't know. I liked it. I liked that it made me reflect on what I would have done if I was in the situation. I can see both sides, but I think I know which side I would have been on. This book takes place in like the late 60s. So In My Father's House starts with this lady named Virginia Kohler. She runs this boarding house and she's in her kitchen cooking. And so while she's cooking, this man shows up on her doorstep. And so when she goes to see him and greet him, she doesn't like the way he looks because he looks sick and she thinks he might be out of his mind. And he's wearing this like old army cap and he's wearing this overcoat and it's raining outside. She doesn't want to invite him in because he don't look right, but she decides to go ahead and invite him in because he don't have nowhere else to go. She's like, he can't rent a room on the white side of town, so I guess I gotta let him in. But she's secretly hoping he can't afford to stay. So she invites him in. She starts asking him questions like, what's his name, where's he from? And sometimes he'll answer the question and sometimes he won't. And when he doesn't answer the question, she'll get all huffy with him and she'll be like, I'm accustomed to being answered when I ask a question. So his name is Robert X. That's the name he goes by. And he says he's from Chicago. But Virginia doesn't believe this. So he pays to stay a week. But the money he pays with is like weird. It's like black. And it's like weirdly colored and stuff like this. And so Virginia's weirded out by him. She doesn't want him to stay. But she accepts the money because he don't have nowhere else to go. And so she gets him settled and stuff like that. And then she goes and calls Fletcher the cab driver. He drives like all the black people straight to Virginia's house. And I don't know if this was a joke or not. But apparently like he'll point a gun at them to get them to go over there to her house. She calls Fletcher to see if dropped Robert off, and Fletcher's like, no, I didn't drop him off. He insisted on walking and I just let him walk. He lets Virginia know that she's got a handful on her hands. So Virginia is nervous because she's like, oh my gosh, Fletcher didn't bring him over and I don't want him staying here, but he don't have nowhere else to go. So she takes him some food and she starts asking him some more questions. Like last time, he'll answer the questions when he feels like it and he won't answer it, and she has to be like, I'm accustomed to being answered. And so when she takes him the food, he asks if there's a Baptist church around there, and Virginia's shocked by this because she assumes that he's Muslim because he goes by X as his last name. And she's like, yeah, we got Solid Rock Baptist Church, which is run by my Reverend Philip J. Martin. He's a pillar in the community, and we're hoping to send him to Washington. He's done so much for St. Adrian. Robert, he's like, oh, really? He's that high up? And Virginia's kind of like, well, yeah, what you mean? Because she's like, she's shocked why this man who just came into town would be skeptical about her reverend. And so after Virginia gets him settled and she goes on about her business, Robert goes out at night and he goes sits on the back porch of the church. Everybody starts telling Virginia that they've been seeing him around town being weird and stuff like that. And she doesn't believe it at first because she hasn't seen him since he first came. But then, you know, reports start coming in that he's been sitting around town, walking around town, just being standoffish and paying with the weird black money that he has. And so Virginia's like, oh Lord, what is going on around here? And he's been spotted outside Reverend Martin's house, but he don't speak to nobody. So everybody's kind of like weirded out by him and skeptical about what he's there for and what he's doing. So then the next person we go to is Elijah. Elijah lives with Reverend Martin and his wife Alma and their kids. He teaches Reverend Martin's daughter how to play piano for his keep. He is a music teacher and he lives with Reverend Martin. So one day he's out driving to go and meet his friends like at the bar. He comes across Robert, and so he offers Robert a ride. Robert, he kind of act like he don't want to take it at first, but he takes it, and Elijah starts talking to him. Robert is doing what he do. He answers the questions when he feels like it, doesn't answer them when he don't feel like it. And they get on the topic of Reverend Martin, and Robert becomes interested in the conversation all of a sudden. Robert starts asking about Elijah's relationship to Reverend Martin, and Elijah explains that, they're having a party on Saturday. He invites Robert to the party, and Robert's like, yeah, I'll go. So Robert, he wants to get out the car, and he decides he'll walk the rest of the way to where he's going. So Elijah lets him, and then he goes to the bar to meet with his friends. Now, they're all teacher friends, but the only two that are important are Beverly and Shepard. Shepard is an ex-football player who went to Southern University, and he and Beverly have been dating for a long time. Beverly wants to get married, but Shepard is avoiding getting married to her because he's not ready yet. Elijah stops in to talk to the teacher friends. He explains that he talked to Robert, and he tells Shepard that he wants Shepard to pick Robert up for the party. Shepard is not excited about this because he's like, why would you volunteer me for something and not ask me beforehand? And so Shepard, he gets upset about that, and Beverly is like, you need to do it because everyone around here believes that you're mean. Shepard doesn't think he's mean, but a lot of people do think that he's mean. I don't think Shepard's mean. I think he just likes to make his own decisions, and he's just not with the bullcrap. And so they get to talking about like the civil rights movement and stuff like that. Some of the teachers believe that the movement is already done because they've already gotten so much. Beverly believes that as teachers, they should be on the front lines doing more. And so they just get to discussing the civil rights and stuff like that. So for the rest of the week, Robert has been worrying everybody at the boarding home. He's been pacing back and forth in his room, being antisocial. One night he screamed and everybody got worried because they're like, what's wrong with him? So when Shepard goes over there on Saturday to pick him up for the party, Virginia starts ranting to Shepard. She's like, I don't like this man in my house. He is creeping me out. He is doing weird stuff. He's screaming. He got me worried. To make matters worse, he's paid for another week to stay here. So Shepard goes up there to see if Robert is ready for the party. And when he gets up there, Robert is a mess. He looks a mess. He's drunk. The room is a mess. It's all type of alcohol bottles all over the place. It's trash all over the place. So Shepard goes in there and he's like, are you good? And Robert's like, no, I'm not good. My soul hurts. And so they get to talking, and Robert says he just got out of prison. And Shepard, starts asking him, why is he there? And Robert's like, I'm here for a conference. And Shepard's like, what kind of conference? And Robert's like, a black man's conference. I'm here to meet with another man about something. And so Shepard, he wants to get moving to the party because he's like, I'm just doing this because Elijah asked me to do this. I really don't feel like doing this. But Robert, he's kind of distracted by like the trash in the alley outside of his window. And he says that's how his soul feels. His soul feels like trash in the alley that's been forgotten and discarded. And so he tells Shepard to go because he don't want to be a burden. And he's gonna die soon. He starts talking like that, but then he decides to go. And so they go to the party, and when they get there, Reverend's wife, Alma, she's significantly younger than him. It's kind of like a one-sided marriage, kind of. She takes Shepard's coat. She tries to take Robert's coat, but Robert don't want to give up the coat. Elijah comes up to them. He asks Shepard to keep an eye on Robert, which makes Shepard mad because he's like, I just agreed to bring him to the party. I ain't agreed to be his chaperone too. But Shepard does it because it's the nice thing to do. He meets up with Beverly. Shepard and Beverly having a good time, but Robert's acting weird. And so when they see Reverend Martin, Robert starts like being weird and nervous, and Shepard's like, what's wrong with you? So then this man named Howard Mills, who is a friend of the Reverend, he comes over and they start talking, and he looks at Robert. He's like, you look familiar. Do I know you from somewhere? And Robert's like, no. And then this other man, the assistant pastor, Jonathan Robert Lard, comes over. Jonathan is this really young man. He comes over and he starts talking to Shepard. He starts ranting about like the white people at the party, because it's some white people there who's like supposed to be helping for the fight with civil rights. And Jonathan starts ranting about them. He's like, we don't need them. We don't need their help. And so he and Shepard have some discussion about that. So Reverend Philip Martin, he's 60. He has his daughter Joyce Ann, which is the one who plays piano. He also has some younger kids. He's not perfect. He's cheating on Alma. But everybody in the community respects him because he's done so much for the community. He calls the room to attention, and he starts going on this spiel about what they're all gathered for. And so basically what's going on is that there's this man named Mr. Schnell. He runs like this store in St. Adrian, and majority of the black people are employed at this store, but they're not being paid the same wages as the white people. And so The fight for civil rights in this book is to get everybody paid equally at the store, because they've already had to fight very hard just to work at the store. So now they're having to fight to get equal pay at the store. They plan on boycotting the store by picketing in front of it and boycotting it until they can get equal pay. And so Philip, he starts calling on various people in the room to give testimony about how Shinnell has mistreated them and stuff like that, and why it's important that they fight for this. And everybody gets all in agreement, and they're like, yeah, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. So after the speech, everybody's having a good time. Joyce Ann starts playing the piano, and Philip notices Robert across the room staring at him, and he gets nervous. Shepard notices Philip staring in their direction, and he gets jealous because he thinks Philip is staring at Beverly. So he starts trying to make this face to kind of get the Reverend to not be checking out his girl. But Philip is really staring at Robert because he recognizes Robert. And he recognizes Robert because Robert and Shepard and Beverly have been discreetly moving closer to Philip. Shepard and Beverly just suspected that they were just, moving around the party like usual, but Robert was purposely moving them in that direction because he knew that they were staying with him. When Philip sees him, he tries to move closer to Robert, and then he collapses, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, he collapsed. The white man rushed to help him. Jonathan rushes to help him, and one of the white men pushes him back like, we got this, boy. And so Jonathan starts going off. He's like, you see that? They call me boy. You see how they call me boy, and they always be mistreating us when stuff gets serious? Basically trying to state his case on why they don't need them. Some people are paying attention to him, but everybody's mostly focused on Philip, who's falling out on the floor. So Philip comes to, and he's like, oh my gosh, I'm on the floor. Get me off the floor. Get me off the floor. I'm on my back. I'm on my back. Get me off the floor. And so they eventually get him up off the floor. And Robert, he's staring at him, and then he just kind of disappears during all the chaos. And Philip's like, I can't deny him again. I can't deny him again. Don't let me deny him again. Everybody's like, what is he talking about? So they get him to the room, and they get the doctor there. The doctor says that he's just tired and he needs some rest. And so the party disperses. Jonathan spread a rumor around that the white man poisoned him. So the rumors started going around that he's been poisoned, and everybody's calling the house for updates on him. And Elijah's like, no, that's not true. He's just tired. He's just tired. And Virginia calls, and she has some words with Elijah saying what she's heard about it. And Elijah's, no, he's just tired. He just needs some rest. And Elijah just basically answers phone calls until everybody stops calling and he goes to bed. So then Philip gets up in the middle of the night and he goes into his office to think. And Alma's like, you need to go back to bed. You don't need to be up here thinking and doing all this stuff. You don't need to be up working. You need to be resting. And Philip's like, I need to think. I need to work. So they get to arguing about it. And Alma, she's like, you know what, do what you want. And she goes to bed, pissed off. And then Elijah comes and he's like, Reverend, I think you need to go back to bed. And Philip's like, no, I need a minute to myself. And so then Elijah leaves, and then he comes back and Philip's like, you know what, fine, whatever, I will go to bed. So he goes to bed. So Philip cannot sleep. And he can't sleep because he's thinking about Robert. And he wants to go in his office to think, but everybody won't let him. So he finally lays down and goes to sleep. And he only gets an hour of sleep. And when he wakes up the next morning, Alma has called him out from preaching, and Jonathan preaches in his place at the church. And so Alma's trying to tend to him and make sure he's good, but all he can think about is Robert. So after church, Howard Mills stops by to talk to Philip. And so they get to talking about Robert and stuff like that. Howard has something to say to Philip, but he can't remember what it was. But he keeps looking at Philip weirdly, and then he leaves after they finish talking. And so then Philip thinks about the premonition that he had before Robert came, and he thinks about a dream that he had. Philip would not move from the window. Now he was thinking about the dream he had the night before the boy got there. In the dream, he was sitting on the side of the bed, just as he's been doing 21 years ago. In the dream, just as it had happened that day, he saw the boy's small hand in the crack of the door as he took the money from the woman. He left with the money, but soon brought it back. When he left the second time, Philip got up from the bed and ran after him. In the dream, it happened like that. But 21 years ago, he hadn't run after the boy at all. He had sat on the bed, looking down at the floor, until he was sure the boy had gone. Then he went to the woman who was still clutching the money, tore it out of her hand, and threw it into the fire. And so after thinking about that dream and thinking about how in the dream he had gone after the little boy, whereas in real life he didn't go after the little boy, but instead stayed with the woman who was with him at the time, he tries to distract himself and then finally falls asleep. And so when he wakes back up, he's thinking more about Robert. Alma leaves to go get their other kids, And while she's out, he sneaks into his office to finally like sit down and think. Look out the window for Robert because Robert has been standing outside his window, like across the street. He's like, maybe if I go look out the window, he'll be there today and we can finally talk. And so when he goes look, he's looking and looking and looking for Robert, but Robert doesn't ever show up. He goes talk to Elijah, who's in the living room playing the piano. And Philip asks how service go. Oh, service was okay. Jonathan, he's still not ready to be like a head pastor and nothing like that. He didn't really connect with the people in his sermon and like that. And Philip's like, yeah, he just needs some more experience. He needs to learn not to talk so scholarly, but to talk to the people like they're people. And Philip, his pride is hurt. His pride is hurt because he fell out in front of everybody. The only other time I fell out was when I was 15 and I caught the Holy Ghost for the first time. I haven't fell out any other time, not even when I was shot and stuff like that. So his pride is hurt because he fell out in front of everybody and he looked weak. And he allowed everybody to say, oh, he's weak, he's tired. And he's like, how could this happen? I've always been strong. I've always been, this great man who's been able to do these great things. How could I allow them to say I was weak and tired? His pride is hurt. They get on the topic of Robert, and Philip almost lets it slip about what he knows about Robert, but he catches himself. And Elijah says that he thinks Robert is mentally ill. He thinks that Robert is homeless, and he says that Robert doesn't care about living. So Philip wants to see him, and, he goes to his office for the rest of the day to think. And so Philip wants to know how Robert found him and why. He suspects that Robert is about 27, and he realizes that he can't remember Robert's real name. And at this point, it's pretty obvious that Robert is his son from a previous relationship. The mother is Johanna, even though Johanna is the woman he was truly in love with, but he never married her because he wasn't ready to be married. He was young, he didn't have no money, and they had like 3 kids together. And so they ended up leaving town, and Philip just let them leave town. He gave Robert his last $3, one for him and his siblings, and that was like all the money he had left, and he let them leave. So that's what his dream was about. His dream was about that day that they left. And instead of going after them like he did in the dream, Philip let them leave, and he stayed with the woman who was with him, that he was sleeping with. And so Philip regrets this. Alma returns with their other children, and they have dinner, and then they retire for the evening. And so while Philip is sitting there, retired for the evening with Alma, he comes up with this idea to have a party. He tells Elijah, he wants to invite everybody over for Tuesday night, get some good alcohol, invite Robert over, and we gonna have a good time. So when Elijah confirms that everybody can come over Tuesday night, Alma gets upset because she's like, when was you gonna tell me that you was inviting all these people over? This is my house too. The least you could have done was told me. And so she storms off, but Philip is not really worried about her because he's just excited to finally see Robert and talk to him and get to know him and stuff like that. And so then he goes to bed, and Alma's pissed off at him. And so then when he gets up the next day, he goes and he prays. After he gets done praying, he goes to breakfast, and at breakfast he reads this story about another black boy who was found dead, and they couldn't identify him. And so he was just called X. This story has an effect on him, so he goes outside to sit and think. In the process of doing this, he and Alma get to talking about his health. He gets to flirting with Alma a little bit, and Alma's like, yeah, no, we're not doing nothing for a week, doctor's orders. And Philip's like, okay, well, in a week, you know what's up. And she wants him to let her be a part of the civil rights movement and be more active in his life. But Philip's like, no, your place is here in the home. He doesn't want her to be all super involved. He just kind of wants her to be like his wife. And she tells him, Philip, you only come to me when you want to sleep with me and stuff like that. You don't ever come to me with serious stuff, and I'm supposed to be your wife. And so Philip is he's kind of shocked about what she's saying. And so after this conversation, he starts questioning himself and his accomplishments and what he's really done in the community, if he's really accomplished anything. And so after he has this conversation with her, he goes outside. He's staring out at the street, and he sees the tree that Robert is said to always be standing by, and he sees that Robert's not there. But then he notices this fence that's always been there. It's part of his house, and he gets pissed off because this fence is in the way of his view of the tree. And so Alma calls him inside to come rest and stuff because it's cold outside. But Philip's ignoring her because he's pissed off about that fence, and he's thinking about tearing that fence down. So that Tuesday, Shepard and Elijah go to get Robert. When they get there, Virginia says that she's concerned about him because he's got a gun and she's scared that he'll use it. Shepard believes that he's capable of using it, but he tries to give him the benefit of the doubt. But Virginia's not hearing it because Robert was once again screaming in his room, worrying everybody, and Shepard tells Virginia that if she's so scared of him, she needs to put him out. But she can't because he's paid for another week and he don't got nowhere to go. And so Shepard and Elijah go up there to get him, but Robert's not there. And so Elijah's like, we gotta find him. And Shepard's like, who is we? And Elijah's like, please come on, help me find him. So Shepard reluctantly goes with Elijah to search for him. They go all over town searching for him and they can't find him. Shepard grows tired of searching for him because Beverly's at the bar waiting for him. And so Shepard demands to be dropped off at the bar. And Elijah's like, no way, I think I know one more place where he might be. And Shepard's like, well, you go over there and you search for him and you drop me off at the bar. I don't care about this man. I only agreed to look for him because you asked. So Elijah drops Shepard off and he goes searching some more. But he can't find Robert, so he gives up and he goes home. He tells Philip that Robert's not coming and he doesn't know where he is, and Philip gets saddened by this and he goes to his office. And so then later that night, Shepard drops by with Beverly to tell them that Robert has been located. He was arrested by the Sheriff Nolan, and Philip's like, okay, I gotta go get him out. And so before Philip can go to like get him out, Shepard tells him what Virginia told them about him screaming and acting weird and having a gun, and Philip gets concerned. So he walks Shepard and Beverly out to their car. He talks to them for a little bit, and he's kind of staring at Beverly because Beverly reminds him of Johanna, and Shepard of course notices him staring at Beverly, and of course he gets jealous again. The next morning, Philip goes to get Robert. So when he gets down there, the officers, they're giving him a hard time, you know, they're acting like he's not there. And so eventually he makes it into Nolan's office, and he and Nolan, they grew up together, respect each other, but they don't like each other. Nolan wants the reason for why Philip is trying to get Robert out, and so Philip, he's beating around the bush, but he eventually has to reveal that Robert is his son. And so when Philip reveals this, Nolan's like, your son, and he starts interrogating him, but Philip don't have no information to give because he wasn't a part of Robert's life. And Nolan gives him an ultimatum, and he's like, I'll let you take Robert if y'all don't go down there and demonstrate. Philip is like going back and forth about it. He's like, I can't do that. We worked so hard for this. But Nolan's not budging. He's like, you want your son back? How to tell them they can't demonstrate. And so Philip reluctantly agrees because he wants Robert that badly. And so Nolan, he makes fun of Philip and he tells Philip, oh, you're not as manly as I thought you were. Nolan has Robert brought to the room. And so he asks Robert who he is. Robert says that his name is Robert Sims. And Nolan asks him, is Philip his father? And Robert is like, I don't know. And so then he tells Robert, oh, you know, Philip paid a very great price to get you out of here, so I better not see you back in here again. They leave, and Philip tries to talk to Robert, but Robert won't talk to him. So Philip takes him out to these cane fields to talk. And so when they get to talking, you know, Philip asks about Johanna. Robert tells him that Johanna's not doing well and that she's grieving her other two kids who died 11 years ago. Philip is shocked by this, and so he asks Robert for more information. Robert says he came back for revenge for ruining the family and that he hates Philip and that he got the money from Johanna. Robert, you know, he holds him to task for claiming to love them but not being around because Philip, you know, he's trying to make the case that he loves Robert and that he cares about them. But Robert's like, how can you love us and care about us? You weren't even in our lives. You weren't around. And so Robert's getting more and more hateful and spiteful as they talk. You know, he explains what happened. His sister was taken advantage of by one of Johanna's boyfriends. His brother Antoine had to avenge her because Robert wouldn't do it because Robert was like, no, this is something for the law to do. Robert wanted to go after Philip and Johanna was like, well, if you want to go after him, here's the money. And so she took like their money jar and she threw it on the floor and she told him, you want to go after him so bad, you pick up the money. And so he picked up the money from amongst the glass shards, you know, cut his hands a few times. But that was how desperate to get that money to go get revenge. That's how he got the money and that's how he got out there. Robert barely remembers Philip. The siblings don't know Philip at all. And so Philip, he's distraught by this. He tries to get Robert to talk to more, but Robert's not trying to hear nothing he tried to say. He's mad, he's upset, he's hating him, he's spiteful. He like demands Philip to call him by name, but Philip can't do it because Philip don't know his name. So Robert walks away. And so instead of going after him, like he drives around town for a little bit and ends up at his godmother's house. And so when he gets there, you know, he notices like some of the neighborhood boys in the back chopping wood, having a good time, you know, drinking and stuff like that. And he remembers when he was like, before he became a reverend. And so he's sitting in the driveway of his godmother's house. He's too ashamed to go in because he's concerned that his godmother's gonna like see through him and his reasons for being there because he hasn't really gone to visit her in a long time. He's ashamed to talk to her. He's scared that she's gonna emasculate him for being in his feelings and stuff like that. But eventually he decides to go in. You know, she's sitting there with her homegirl and she's like, what you doing here? You barely come to see me. What you doing over here? So he sees his godmother and he's kind of like reluctant to open up to her and stuff like that. But she knows what's going on with him. So she lets him know that Chippo is the one who saw Johanna. Chippo is his old friend from back in the day who he describes as his soul brother. So when he finds out that Chippo is the one who saw Johanna, he starts getting excited. You know, the young boys, they come inside and Philip starts, like talking about his past with Chippo, and he's like, "Oh, give me that alcohol bottle." So he starts drinking the alcohol, and the boys, they like become more comfortable with him because he's acting like them. And he's like, "Yeah, me, I used to be able to drink Chippo under the table back in the day and stuff like that." And they don't believe it because Chippo is known to drink a lot. But he's like, "No, I'll prove it." So he starts drinking, and he gets comfortable with them, and he gets excited because he realizes all he has to do is find Chippo and get an explanation from Chippo, and he'll finally be able to understand his son and learn his name. He goes home, he's excited, he's planning to go find Chippo, and then Jonathan and the other men come over to see him. And they are upset because Shinnell has been celebrating. So they think that Philip struck a deal with Shinnell. And so Philip explains what went on at the sheriff's office, and all the men get upset with him. And they start going back and forth. They're like, "You know how important this was to us. How could you do this for some boy?" And so Philip has to explain that Robert is his son. Jonathan is the most vocal about his disapproval and stuff like that. The other men are like, "Oh, we got sons too," and stuff like that. "We in similar predicaments as you, but we wouldn't do what you did because we know how important the movement is." And so they go back and forth, and they decide to vote Philip out as leader of the movement. And Philip's like, "So y'all gonna vote me out, and who's gonna take my place?" And so he realizes that Jonathan's gonna take his place here, and he warns Jonathan, "You have no idea what you're up against. You have no idea what it's like to lead a movement like this, and you just don't have enough life experience." And Jonathan's like, "Oh, I've been with the movement since the beginning." And Philip's like, "Yeah, you've been with the movement since the beginning, since you were like 12, 13, but you didn't live life before the movement. You don't know what led up to the movement." And I was on Philip's side in this argument as it relates to Jonathan, because I'm like, you think you know everything, but you haven't lived the life leading up to the movement. You're going to crash and burn. You are going to crash and burn because you think you know everything, but you don't have the experience that Philip has. You don't even have the experience that the other men in the room have. They're only voting you in because you're young and you're radical. And, sometimes young and radical is good, but like Philip said, you don't have the experience. And so the men, they're like, "This is important to us because most of us are old, and this might be the last time for us to take a stand against Shinnell and his mistreatment of us and the racism." And so they vote Philip out. And Howard stays behind to talk to Philip a little bit. He's like, "I was trying to put my finger on it, what it was, and I finally realized what it was I was trying to tell you. That boy, he's your son." He says that he wished that Philip had trusted them more, but he didn't even give them a chance to trust them and stuff like that. And so that's why they're all disappointed with him. And so Philip gets upset, and he gets drunk. And then he gets into it with Alma because Alma is like, "You're too high-minded. You think too highly of yourself. You don't trust the people around you to help you with what's going on." And so he decides that he's going to go to Baton Rouge to look for Chippo. And Alma tells him, "Ain't nothing out there in Baton Rouge. You ain't going to find nothing out there." He's not listening. So he decides to leave and go to Baton Rouge to find Chippo. And so while he's out there going to look for Chippo, Alma's son comes in, and she comforts him, and she's worried about Philip. So Philip drives to Baton Rouge, and when he gets there, he starts looking for Chippo, starts asking around all these places. And he comes across all these different people who point him in the direction of Chippo. They're like, "Oh yeah, go here, that's where I last seen him. Go here, that's where I last seen him." So he basically going all around the city looking for this man. And so, as he's going around the city looking for this man, he stops by, all the old spots they used to visit, and everything's, the same, but it's different. And so, eventually, he makes his way over to Chippo's house. And when he gets there, Chippo's not home, and his next-door neighbor is sitting outside waiting on him. And she's like, "Oh, he ain't home. I'm waiting on him to get home because he owed me some money." And so, she tells Philip, "When you see him, tell him I'm waiting on him and my money." And he stops in at this diner. And so, while he was out looking, he learned about this boy called Turner, who got killed for stealing. But everybody doesn't believe that it was really for stealing. Everybody believes that it was because he was black, and because he's part of this movement of boys in the area who've been going out in the swamp training for a revolution. So Philip, he stops in at this diner, and as he's at this diner, he comes across this other man who is a reverend. And so he and the reverend, they get to talking to each other. And the Reverend basically encourages him, and they get to talking about fatherless homes and stuff like that. And Philip realizes just how much of a problem fatherless homes are. And keep in mind, Philip has a whole bunch of kids by a whole bunch of different women. And he himself has been a proponent of fatherless homes. And he has taken pride in creating fatherless homes. But now that Robert's come around, now he's like, "Oh, this is such a problem." And he's like, "How do we fix this problem?" So Peter, who is the other Reverend, tells Philip to try the liquor store where Chippo goes to buy his liquor. So he goes in there, everybody in there drinking, having a good time, and he comes across this one boy named Billy. Billy is the ringleader of the boys who've been out in the swamp training for the revolution. And so after taking some time in there to talk and find out where Chippo is, Billy is asked to take Philip to go find Chippo. So as they're driving to the next town over to go find Chippo, Billy starts explaining that his plan is to get like 1,000,000 people, burn down all of this stuff in the United States to kind of like start a revolution. And Philip tries to talk him out of this plan. Billy's not trying to hear it because he's been to Vietnam and he's lost all his friends to Vietnam. He's like, we did all that fight and just to come back and for nothing to change, like nothing's changing and we need to see some change around here. So Billy decides that this is his plan to spark change. And so Philip tells him, you're playing with fire. And Billy's like, I'm willing to die to do what I gotta do. Philip can't get Billy to change his mind. They go to like all the spots Chippo is said to be at, and they can't find him. So Philip decides to stop at this one place that he and Chippo used to go to a lot. And Billy goes on about his business and tells Philip, oh, I hope you find what you're looking for. And Philip once more tries to encourage him not to go through with his plan, but Billy is dead set on his plan. Philip, he goes inside this place, and you know, it's a place that he used to frequent a lot, and he's like, nothing's changed except for the crowd. They're all younger. So he goes in there, he, you know, orders some food, orders a drink, goes inside the gambling bit of the place to see if Chippo's in there. Chippo's not in there. So he comes out to get his food, and he spots this old friend, Adeline Toussaint. They weren't dating, but they like used to get together back in the day. They talk for a little bit, and Adeline, you know, she kind of like flirts with him a little bit and invites him back to her place. And Philip, he doesn't really take her up on the offer at first, but he doesn't really reject it either. And she says that she didn't really love Philip and that she was lying to not hurt his feelings. But Philip, Philip, he rejects her offer to go to her sister's house because he's like, he's too old for that. Philip goes back to Chippo's house and he waits for Chippo, and Chippo eventually shows and they get to talking. And Chippo is reluctant to tell Philip about what he found out in California, but Philip is relentless, so Chippo finally explains. He confirms Robert's story to be true. He says that Robert and Johanna were like living really strangely. Robert basically has been the man of the house up until the incident. Antoine tried to take the gun to go shoot him, but Robert wouldn't let him, so Antoine basically had to punch Robert to get the gun away from him, and he ran off and he shot and killed the boyfriend, and he got taken to jail for it. He did like 2 years in jail, and then after that, Robert and Johanna, they kind of grew distant away from Antoine and the sister because the sister started to see Antoine as the man of the house because he took care of business while Robert didn't. There kind of grew a distance between them, and Antoine and the sister, they moved away to New York, so they're not actually dead. That was a lie that Robert told Philip because Antoine and the sister are basically considered to be dead to Johanna and Robert since they have basically no contact with the siblings. And so that's why Johanna is grieving because she has no contact with her children no more. After that, Robert and Johanna became reclusive to the rest of the community. They kind of like stayed to themselves, and it kind of like became kind of like a tomb in their house because they were basically like dead to the world, but they weren't. When Chippo came out there and, you know, like got in contact with Johanna, Chippo let it slip that Philip was doing good. He was married, had more kids. And Philip learns that Robert's real name is Etienne. And so Philip is happy because he finally finds out Robert's real name. Chippo tells Philip everything he learns is basically everything that Robert told Philip. And he says that the boy came out there for revenge and to reclaim his position as man of the house, because he's like, I gotta kill Philip to get my position as man of the house back because Philip is the reason we in this mess in the first place. And so Chippo is relieved that he finally told Philip and that he's got it off his chest, but now Philip feels heavy because he feels like he has just failed at every aspect of life. And Chippo tells him to, you know, just let the past go, let it be, and just look forward to the future. So as they're talking, Shepard, Beverly, and Alma come by, and they let Philip know that Robert drowned himself. Philip is super upset about this. He's like, I've lost my son, I've lost my position, I've lost everything I worked so hard for. And so he basically is like, what else is there left to do in life? He's like, you know what, I don't care about my life no more. I'm gonna go take Adeline up on her offer. So he tries to get out the house. Alma's like, yeah, let him go do what he needs to do, let him go do what he thinks he needs to do. Everybody else is like, no, you can't leave. They're trying to keep him in the house. Philip is trying to fight his way out the house, but everybody's staying strong and keeps him in the house. Alma goes off to cry and like all of that because she can't stand there and watch And so Beverly encourages Philip. She's like, just because you've lost everything doesn't mean it was for nothing. Like, you've done so much and you've given everybody so much, and you can't just throw all that away just because you've lost the boy. But Philip's not trying to hear her because he's in his feelings, and he's like, no, I've lost everything. What else is there to live for? And so Chippo tries to encourage him, but Philip's not trying to listen. Shepard tries to encourage him, but Philip calls him out for being faithless. And Shepard's like, well, that's just the way life is. And so everybody's trying to encourage him. And Philip, he finally calms down, and Beverly encourages him and tells him, the future is still worth fighting for, even if it's not the way that you've been fighting for it up to this current point. And so Philip, he's tired. He's like, I'm over it. I've lost everything. I am sick of fighting for everybody. And like the one time I finally want to do something for myself, everybody turn on me. So after he goes through all of this, everybody leaves. Chippo tells him that he thinks Shepard and Beverly gonna be alright. They finally gonna get married. And Chippo leaves to go do what he needs to do, and Philip goes in the room with Alma. He and Alma talk, and he tells Alma he don't know where to go from here, and Alma's like, we just gotta start over. And that's where the book ends. So my final thoughts on In My Father's House were, I did enjoy the book. I gave it a 4. I really related to the characters and their emotions and what they were going through. Even though I haven't really been in those situations, I do have my father in my life. Don't play. I come from a 2-parent Christian household. My parents are married. Don't play. I have a great relationship with my father, but I could relate to some of the feelings, like the individual feelings that the characters were feeling. I could relate to some of the struggles they were going through. And there were some things that was brought up in book club that were really interesting, like how Philip, he had all these opportunities to reconnect with his son. Instead of just going the direct way and doing it directly, he had to go all around the world just to figure out the boy name, instead of spending time with his actual son. And Tati brought this up in the book club. She said how he was doing all that and he'd been praying for his son, but because it didn't come how he wanted it to come, now he's not satisfied when he got what he asked for. It just didn't come in the way he wanted it to come. And I also want to say that I feel like Jonathan's gonna crash and burn. I really liked how the actual, like, what they're building up to, the whole protest, that goes on without Philip. And Philip is over here like lost and confused about what he's going to do, because it really just, I liked how it was done, because it really showcased how Philip made all these contributions. He did all of this work, and yet at the end of the day, it mattered, but it didn't matter. It mattered because he did change some things, but it doesn't matter because he's not going to be around forever to help. And so at some point, the movement's going to move on without him. And so it's like, what do I do now that the movement has moved on without me? So I really like that. I really just did enjoy this book. It was really nice. It was really fun. It was relatable. And Ernest J Gaines is to me what Toni Morrison is to black women. Okay, I read this comment on Toni Morrison somewhere that said that Toni Morrison writes to the hearts of black women. So I've been on a search to find like a male equivalent to Toni Morrison, and I believe Ernest J Gaines is that for me. I mean, I've only read 2 books by him so far, A Gathering of Old Men and In My Father's House. They have characters I could relate to, characters who, some experiences I may not have lived through, but I've known people who've lived through them, and some experiences I have lived through. They were relatable, and they showcased Southern black people and Southern black men in a mostly positive and respectful light. Of course, they did some things that are things that I would not do, things I would not agree with, of course, but for the most part, it was positive, it was respectful. It showcased us in a good light. It didn't have us out here looking annoying and country and slow and a mess. I liked it. Thank you for tuning into this video. If you liked it, give it a like, a comment, and be sure to subscribe to my channel, especially if you like my personality, if you liked the way I told you this story. If you really like me, feel free to go buy my books, okay? Because I do write books too, I don't just read them. And you should, I'm pretty sure you can tell by the way I tell these stories that I know what makes a good book and doesn't make a good book. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.